by knowing someone's history and understanding where they came from, you understand what they're saying now. And so I think it's important for us to capture these people who made big changes or who were in the industry for a long time, so that people who come forward will know, okay, this is what it was like before, this is what it's like now. And it's to encourage young people to stay involved, stay engaged, get involved in the energy industry in Trinidad. So yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Gabriel. This is Miss Carol Telemaque. And this is another episode of GSTT Energy Beginnings and Legends, like beginnings and ends, celebrating our geological foundation and future. Right? So, if you haven't seen this series before, basically, in order for us to build our future of Trinidad and Tobago, where we want our energy industry to go, where we want our country to go, we have to understand where we came from. So we're talking to some of the people who built the foundation on which our local energy industry is built. Right? So Miss Carol Telemaque was a manager. She worked at 3 incarnations of our national oil company. So it would have been Tesero, which became Tobago, and eventually became Petrotrin. And you ended your career as
Senior Manager, Exploration and Development, Petrotrin.
Senior Manager, Exploration and Development. So that was 2-3 rungs below the CEO, right?
Yeah.
So basically, we wanted to capture as many perspectives on that growth from 1970 to now, because we want to understand where we came from.
Right.
So we could tell the young people, this is how we got to where we are.
Yes.
And then once we understand that, we can understand where we're going. Right? So essentially, for those who are young like me, the inspiration for this is your life, right? So it's we're just telling you a story. Right? So we start at the beginning. So what secondary school did you go to?
It was one of the best secondary. Well, thank you for having me, first of all, and congratulations on this project. I think it's very important to document the history of our experiences in life, especially from the people who were experiencing the history at the time. So, congratulations.
You're welcome.
I went to Naparima Girls High School, which was my mother's alma mater.
Okay.
So, in the tradition of my mother, it was expected that that's where we would go. And so that's what we did, my sister and myself. So that's where, it started with primary school in the oil fields, in fact.
Okay.
Which is where I grew up. I was born and grew up in the oil fields.
So was it part of the landscape?
Yes, from inception. I am the first and only person in my family who has worked in the oil fields, in fact. Okay. But by a strange number of occurrences, we ended up, my father and mother ended up in the oil fields, and we were born, all of us, me and my siblings, we were all born, and we grew up in the oil fields, in one of the oil field camps, Crest Camp in Faisabad. So that in itself was an interesting experience as part of my early life.
Did that push you towards the industry or away from it? Since you're saying you're the only person, did growing up around derricks and pumping jacks and the industry, how did that shape later on in life and your career choice?
Well, it's hard for you not to be affected by growing up in one of the oil field camps. You wouldn't know, but I don't think they are the same. There are many oil field camps left that are still sort of the places from which the people who work in the industry come. But in those days, the oil field camps were built by the oil company so that the staff and the workers would be close to the operations. And we created an entire lifestyle around the oil fields. So all the people who worked in the oil fields, many of them lived there. We, as young children, we played with children of the people who worked in the oil industry. It wasn't unusual that a derrick or a rig would drive up and park somewhere behind your house, and you would be witnessing the drilling operations or the workover operations, and you would hear the casing clanking on the casing racks in the night, and then my father would come out and ask them to tone down the noise and so on, because we couldn't sleep, and so on and so forth. But even with that, so there was the operations, and we would, in those days, children spent a lot of their time outside. So we would be roaming among the oil wells, we would see all the infrastructure, the tanks. One of the things is the Crest Camp Faisalabad is built on the Faisalabad anticline. And so they are shallow oil and gas reservoirs. And so in the yard, you would actually see eruptions of gas where you would push up and you would see the ground with big holes in it, and the ground push up and all that sort of thing.
That's exciting.
So it was a real, it was, and we spent a lot of time outside running in what we call the bush. And when we went to school, primary school, we went to a smack bang inside of the camp. Yeah, and then we had a lot of social life was built around the clubs. So the clubs had facilities like tennis, swimming, the bar, and we had parties at different times of the year. So it was a complete and lovely way of life, a good living actually.
Right.
So it really influenced me from inception. So that
I see.
It's hard not to be influenced by it. So
I would think so.
Yeah. So when the time came for me to make a decision, I actually never decided early in my life that I wanted to do geology.
Okay.
But I knew that this place was something special. Maybe this is where I could make a career. And so it was always at the back of my mind as I mulled other things. Because, in those days, your parents wanted you to be doctors and lawyers and things like that.
Still today, doctor, engineer, lawyer.
But my father never put engineer in the mix. It was always doctor or lawyer. But that wasn't for me. And so I know that I wanted to do something different. And I felt the oil field seemed to be calling in some way or the other. So that's where it started. And mind you, the oil company supplied all of the utilities. So that was a place where gas was actually piped to all of the homes in the camp.
Were you on the only camp I know from my experience is beach camp? Is that what it was, where you was fenced around?
Well, this one was
the company stayed in the houses, and all the facilities were free.
Yes.
For their families, and for you only, not for anyone else. Was it exclusive? That's my question.
Well, I can't remember all of those details, but I know that we had a lot of resources. All the utilities were free. We didn't pay for, or if it was a nominal sum, maybe 25 cents.
Wow.
And so we got gas piped to the house. We never turned off the stove. We had the hot water heater was running constantly because the gas was just flowing naturally on the pipelines. I never knew what an electric meter looks like until I had I was a big person because we had the electricity coming from the company, and same thing with the water.
Wow.
And so I think it was a really good living. There were good people, both locals and foreigners.
Right.
So there was a mixed community as well.
Yeah.
And we were close to the village, so the children from the village came to the company, the school that the company had established, and so we also met some of those. It was a really good life.
Wow, because just to inject a bit of my experience, my dad was a geologist as well, and now that he's retired, the company no longer gives healthcare to all the retirees. It was a simple thing like, I went to school, you fall, you bust your head, you just walk up the road, and you walk into the doctor's office, and he say, yeah, well, Magnus, all right, go in the back there,
Yes.
You walk out and you don't pay.
Yes, yes. That's how it, we had the medical center in the Crest Camp.
And you just grew up with all of these things, that's, it was just understood that. But when you get older,
And when you get out of
go to the doctor's
it's a shock, you
I
know.
remember the first time I walked out and they were like, so that's $900. What?
It's
know,
a
it's kinda
shock.
like,
It's a
all right,
shock.
yeah. I have to pay
It's
for
a
this
shock.
now, you know.
Yeah.
And
it's a
there
shock.
that was one of the geological foundations, one of the huge benefits of us having that.
Yes.
That the companies, I don't know if it's true, but maybe the government mandated that these things had to be, that was one of the ways I guess they gave back. Or more importantly, probably, do you think that contributed to employees being happier?
Well, I think one thing it did do is ensure that the companies looked after the employees' well-being, so that they could devote their attention to the job at hand. Also, it built a loyalty to the oil company, so that if anything went wrong, the people in the community, even up to not too long ago, would be looking out for the interests of the company. If there was a leak, they would go and they would let the company know that something was happening.
Make a call.
If something they noticed was seen to be out of place and anomalous, they would tell the company. So it built, not just, it was looking after the well-being of the employee so that they could feel that loyalty to the company and also devote their best efforts to the interests of the company.
Yeah, so you look after your people and your people look after you.
Exactly. It was from the schools to the health facilities. There was what Hilo in those days, what you call Massey today. We had one in the community. There was everything that would keep the worker comfortable.
Yeah, real cradle to grave kind of thing. Real cradle to grave.
Yeah, absolutely. And they treated with people with families, people who were single. They also had a special type of housing for them. They had housing for families. And
so you decided, you left Naparima. I guess you went to university and you decided to do geology. When did you come back? Did you immediately come back to Trinidad, or you spent a few years at where you'd studied before you came back?
Well, I went to Mona in St. Augustine. I didn't go with the specific intention of doing geology. I was modeling, thinking about doing maths, and as I was mentioning to you at some point, I met some people in my first year in the maths program. And doing maths, I also did maths and geology.
Okay.
And based on my experience with those, both those subjects, I made a decision at some point that I would focus only on the geology and specialize. There was a program at that time called Special Honors Degree in Geology. So in addition to the traditional geology degree, you would also do additional courses because you would focus purely on geology.
Okay.
So, as I said, when I left Naparima Girls, I graduated, and 3 days later, I was on a plane to Jamaica, and I hadn't made the decision. But when the day I went, I was thinking about maybe geology. And the day I went to register for the first year, as soon as I walked into the hall, I saw this big man sitting at a table with a sign hanging off the side that said geology. So I walked up to him, and that is, as I say, that's history. That's where I really started to make that final decision.
What about this man, or what he spoke to you about that got you?
Well, the thing about it is, geology, I think, was now taking off as a degree program at the University of the West Indies. It started in Jamaica, and then ultimately it came to Trinidad because of our focus on the oil industry. But they were just starting to build that program at the university. So he was trying to interest people in pursuing the program as a course of study. And so we talked about what the program was, and he told me that, try it for the first year. And if you like it, you could then make the decision as to whether you wanted to do the special honors degree or you wanted to do something else. And that's exactly what I did. And he said, based on the results from my first year, then they would also decide whether I could go on and do the special honors. Okay. So that's how it really panned. Cool. So as soon as I finished the degree, actually, I spent a couple of months at the department because one of the professors was doing a project on the lignites in Jamaica.
Right.
So he needed, I guess, a person to try samples, weigh them, record them, and all that sort of thing. So it was like a gentle introduction to the world of work. I got a little stipend, which was exciting.
Yeah.
So that's essentially, and then after that, I came back to Trinidad and began working at Trinidad. So a few months later.
Was there an interview process, or was
yes,
they sought you out in Nona and they knew all the geography grads?
I don't know. I don't think that's how it worked. I think I would have sent out applications. And at that time, the oil companies, Trinidad Tesoro was already operating, and so too was Trinidad.
Right.
And I think they were looking for locals to start to build the local expertise in the upstream business.
So at that point...
And there were not a lot of people who were coming out with geological degrees.
Okay. Yeah. So what was the mix of foreign to local or experience to inexperience within the team that you joined?
When I joined, well, as I say, it was Trinidad Tesoro. And now that company was established, I think, in 1969, when the Trinidad government bought BP's assets, which included the acreage on the southwest side of the southern basin onshore. So I always remember it's 44,000 acres. We always still remember that number. And then they also had, because that's what the area we worked. So all our reports used to say, the 44,000 acres, how you have your introduction.
Right, that's your introduction.
Your technical report and so on. So we always remember that number. And they also had a 1/3 share in Trinidad.
Right.
So the government bought out those assets, and as a result of that, before that, of course, the local scene was dominated by foreign companies. There wasn't a real local expertise, especially in the upper echelons and in management in the oil business. So when the government bought that, they understood that they needed to have some help in running this company. That's where Tesoro Corporation came in, a corporation out of Texas.
Right.
And the government set up the joint venture with the government owning 50.1% and Tesoro Corporation 49.9%. So that's a small majority that the government held, but it gave them the ability. The board of directors, the chairman was Trinidadian, a fellow named Bernard Primus. And the Tesoro and the Tesoro Corporation and Trinidad had the other directors on the board. So there was a mix of both local and foreign. The president of Tesoro Corporation was a man named West, R.V. West. And he was also on the board. And then J.P. Schmalz.
Keep hearing that name.
Yes.
Rings
he was
in the corridors.
There was even a velodrome in Palo Seco named after him. He was seen as a big benefactor of the workers in the area. But in any event, he was from Tesoro. So he became the general manager. So the board, the chairman was a Trinidadian, but there was a mix of directors, both foreign and local, on the board. J.P. Schmalz headed the management. He was the CEO, and he had managers. And it was mostly local when I joined, but a few foreign managers also. So there was always that mix in the running of the organization. So that, and going back to 69, remember, there wasn't local expertise, especially in the upper rounds of the oil business.
And technical.
Yeah. So one of the reasons for being, I guess, we could say, of Trinidad Tesoro was to build local expertise at the management and technical level within the oil business. So I see that as that year as a marker year, as far as that concerned. That to me is where the building of the local expertise in the business really kicked off in an important and way that really brings us to where we are today, where we see so much of that now as the norm in the business.
Yeah, you expect that the CEO of this company and that company is a local person. You do see managers. So
there was a big focus on training because we had to get people. Even the early supervisors, the senior people in the organization, we had some locals who were senior, like Ed Seeley, Mahendra Nath, Ken Birchwood. They were recruited from abroad because there was no local
Right, there was no
expertise.
geology program, and then there were no locals
Working in the
technical
foreign companies before that, and in those positions, high technical levels and management. So Ken Birchwood became the exploration manager. He came from Canada. He would have had this experience over there. So too did Ed Seeley. He was a senior geologist, and Mahendra Nath from Jamaica. He had been working in the ministry in Jamaica. So that's where they started bringing in people with some experience. In other words, returning nationals, bringing their experience and knowledge into the organization and helping and contributing to help to build Trinidad
to cadre of technical and managerial professionals to go forward to take the industry.
So I was one of the young geologists who joined, and Ed and Mahendra were the supervisors at the time, the senior geologists. And it went on from there, you know, lots. And Tesoro Corporation was extremely aggressive. When it came on the scene, the production was about 20,000 barrels a day. By the time they left, which was 16 years later, and remember, these are mature oil fields. The foreign companies were leaving because the bottom line wasn't working for them, you know? So we have the mature oil fields, and, you know, to be able to maintain that production over that 16 years means you had to be extremely aggressive, but that's what they were. So I jumped into an organization that was had a heavy drilling program both for development and enhanced oil recovery. Sometimes we had always had many rigs running, 3-4 rigs. And you had to be generating locations to keep these rigs. These rigs didn't shut down, you know. And then sometimes they would tell us, they would say to us, you know, we're bringing in another rig in 3 months. You know, we would say, what?
And you're like, wait, we already have 4. And we'll have enough locations for those 4.
We're going to do this, you know, we thinking, you know, how in the episode are you going to do this? But we actually did it. And, you know, when I got into management and you started to go on leadership training and so on, you know, they would talk about getting breakthrough results. You set these extreme targets and certain tools that you use to get breakthrough results in achieving that. To me, that's what you were experiencing at that time with the drilling programs. And of course, we had to be monitoring the
when you say tools, it is how you manage and you corral these people and get them focused.
How you engage and enroll around a strategic goal, you know, and that is really what we were doing. They intended to keep that production.
They were serious,
so they were
like
just, and if it is that, you know, you know how much a rig generates in terms of barrels of oil per day. In those days, we used to calculate it's about 700 barrels of oil per day if you have a rig running for the year. So each rig that you bring is 700 barrels of new oil per day that you're generating. So it was very easy. Okay, this is the production target. The rigs we have can't make that right away. We need another rig because we need another 700 barrels. And so that's how it worked. And we got breakthrough results. We had a lot of autonomy to make decisions. Once your location was approved, you were given the go-ahead to get that location permitting. You got the location constructed. We sometimes got locations constructed in 2 or 3 days so that the rig could move on. We could get organized with the serving companies or the logging services. We didn't have all these procurement processes that you have today. That takes much more time.
As a geologist, I was talking to somebody recently and they were saying that, just asking, were you involved at every single stage?
Yes.
So you would have been involved in the upstream part besides me. You would have been involved in every decision. It was not, I'm specialist, here's your location.
Absolutely not.
No, you owned it.
Not.
What was that like?
To me, it was extremely important. One of the things I think we speak about a lot, and we remember those old days, was the general manager of the company when we were young geologists. A man named Leonard Lewis. I think he's on the board of Petroleum.
Yes, another famous name.
Yes. Yeah. When our well log came into the office, Leonard Lewis was the first man in the room with the log, to see the log. All of us went into the room with him. All the people on the floor were free to join. The engineers, the support staff, the drilling people came across from the drilling department, which was in the yard. We had some of the service company personnel, like the people who did the directional and so on. And we would all discuss everything about that well. You know, the results, what we were going to perforate. Did we have all of the facilities ready? Were the pipelines hooked up? Which tanks were these going to? How much could the tanks hold? Is that going to be enough for the production and so on? And we would all sit and discuss it in that room with the general manager. And the message we got from him, from all of this, is that there's nothing else more important to this company than the production from the wells. Right. So we had to be at our best, because he would ask questions and we had to know what was going on. So once we did that, in addition to which we were expected to keep tabs on that well for a year. Right. So that means we had to be with the petroleum engineers, checking on the performance of the well for at least a year. If somebody came and asked you about your well 6 months later, you had to know what had been happening with that well, what it was doing, and how it was. Because you are keeping tabs. Right. No, you had to keep tabs, because you knew for that year that well was yours. Anybody who had a contribution to ensuring that well was optimized and that all was going well was you, the geologist, who generated the location. Right. So that's where I come from in terms of how I view the business.
Right, you were the focal point.
The production, at the end of the day, is the production from the well. It has to be optimized, and you have to make sure if things go wrong, you catch it in time and you fix it. And that's, I guess, part of the reason why they were able to sustain that production as it is.
Because it sounds as though they collapsed the entire organization.
It was small.
The GM who could make a decision is in the room with you.
Yes, and the manager, the GM, the manager, the geologists, petroleum engineers. If it was an EOR well, the reservoir engineers, all the drilling people, so that you knew if you had to make a decision that involved the drilling, or if there was something that they had done in drilling that you needed to consider when deciding on the completion and so on, they were right there to give the necessary feedback and so on. So we were able to make those quick decisions. And you needed to, because you had to move on to the next one.
Right. You have the next location, which is 2-3 weeks away. So what was it? Did you have peers who came back into the industry at the same time as you? And was it different being a kind of in this hybrid world of private and public, and local and foreign? Was your experience different to other people? The people who went to Trinidad, say, which may have been, I guess, entirely state.
Yes, Trinidad was entirely state, and I think that the culture there was different. I think Trinidad to Suriname and then Trinidad were much more aggressive in terms of the work programs and so on. Right. I think we had a lot of autonomy as far as decision making was concerned. It was never a problem for us to make the decision, and we were given the leeway to do that. And with respect to, you talk about peers, now when I joined, I think there was other than the senior people, there might have been 1 or 2 other geologists at the time. And then subsequently, other geologists started to join. And one of the things we had to do, even after you were there for 6 months or a year, is that you had to start to mentor and coach the ones who were coming.
Right. It was important. Yeah.
And we used to question whether you had the, the necessary skills. So you had to show this person the oil winning, the portfolio building processes and so on. But you had to do it. And so it was kind of daunting in a sense. It was also a way for you to confirm your own understanding of what was required. So we were, as people came in, you started to have to train the ones who who were coming in after you, and that was a real
It's a game changer,
addition
you think,
to building your confidence around what it is you're doing.
Right.
You know?
Right. That is amazing. I mean, it must have been really interesting to be straight out of school, and I'm sure within 2 or 3 years running a rig and interacting with all these people. Yeah, that is. I don't think we do that, do we? I don't think we have that experience.
It's a different system now. You have so many other things to think about.
Yeah. So, if you could pick one good memory from that time from Tesoro, what's your best memory of Tesoro and the team?
Well, I think it was those relationships that we built.
Right.
Even with the supervisors like Mahindra and Ed, Ken Boochwood. In addition, we worked very hard, but every week we spent time together, living, chatting, and so on, building really deep relationships that have lasted to this day. And we all say that those are some of the strongest relationships that we have in our lives, even to this day. And I think more than anything else, that is something, I don't know if it was the sessions. I don't know if it was because there weren't as many distractions.
Yeah.
I don't know, or whether they were lovely people that somehow all of us got together. Maybe it's a combination of all of that. But to me, it's the relationships. They last to today. We visit one another's homes. We're still lying together. Some of us are very, very closer than family, in fact.
Yeah.
So that.
I think it's, we want to put it this way, but a bit of shared trauma.
Oh, yes.
10 of you are responsible for 5 rigs, and you're working on it for 6-7 months. I remember there was a time when, I was working and, you'd begin to realize, but wait, I know a little bit more about this person I'm working with than my wife. Because you're there 18, 19 hours a day and you develop relationships. And that is something that I think was probably in the industry back then, but it's very common today because a lot of jobs today require that level of engagement.
I think it was taken at that time. It was taken more as necessary and okay. I don't know if necessary today. Everybody feels that's okay, but certainly But you're right about the shared trauma.
Yeah. So the thing about, I've been in the industry 15 years, and I have this theory that every 5 years something happens. Right? Kind of goes through these cycles. Price of oil gets really high. They hire a whole bunch of people. Price of oil drops. Things get tight. People go home. So we asked all the people these questions. I don't know if you experienced it, but there must have been a major shift. I remember when I was younger, you had the oil crash. The price of oil got really low. And I guess at that time you would have had the 3 national oil companies. What was that like for you as a professional?
You're talking about the crash?
Yeah, $10, $20.
Very traumatic. Very traumatic. And I think
how did work change, and how did your personal life change?
It's very traumatic. And the thing about the oil business is that it happens so often. And I think that's one of the reasons at some point it was very difficult for people to want to study for professions that were related to the oil business because of that kind of a dynamic. And it is never easy because especially, when the oil price is high, things are wonderful. You're making a lot of money, everybody's happy, you can get your 3D seismic that you wanted to do for 20 years, you can find, you get it approved in the budget and all that sort of thing. So those are wonderful times. And then after that, now you get this deep contrast when the oil price plunges.
Right.
And everything that it's almost as though you're going full tilt and then you hit a brick wall.
Right.
Because everything shuts down now. Right. All the projects you were planning, everything you were doing has to be rethought. Right. Budgets have to be redone. Sometimes there's a major restructuring, so you have to set up these structures. You have to get people in place. You have to redo your strategic plans, your business plans, your budgets. And then you have to see, we as the people working down in the trenches, if you're down in the trenches, you have to wait until those things are sorted out before you can pick back up and know what projects, if you're going to have projects to work on.
I see. So that period was a pause.
It is essentially.
Like, we don't know what we're doing.
Yes.
Down tools and
yes.
let's sit in the trench and need some tuna.
Yes, but you're still there at work. Mm-hmm. You're still probably trying to do some courses, train yourself. But you know that the plans that you were working with are no longer going to be the plans that you're going to be continuing. And if this thing is such that it causes like a major event, like happened when we had the mergers when Trinidad became Trinidad, and when Trinidad become Petrotrin, and then Texaco leaves Trinma, and then Trinma is all state and all of that. You know, the effects of that
happened over that period. That happened very quickly. All these.
Yeah, so you have that mix. You have that mix of mergers.
That is
you have the oil price fluctuations, and it really, the first time it happens is a terrible shock because you start to wonder about the future. You know, all this time you were feeling all nice and
you're set here for life. You buy a new bed. You know?
You feel you're set for life, and then all of that now you start to question your job security. People, for the first time, people might started to think about job security. We never used to think about that in the early days.
Wow.
And
this was in the state company.
Yes.
In Trinidad.
Yeah. Wow. And it had repercussions as a result of that, which we may talk about. Yeah. But essentially, and sometimes it will be at least 2 years sometimes before you settle back into the new norm, you know.
Right.
And that is a significant pause. Yeah. You know, sometimes and not just settle down mentally, so you can be fully focused on the oil winning activities, you know, and on the bottom line, which is the dollars.
Oil winning. I like that term,
oil winning and money making. You know, we always say not just about winning the oil, but are you making money?
You're making money.
That's really the big question.
Yeah.
Not how much, not the barrels
of oil,
but how much profit are you generated? Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So wow, that is, I see. So I didn't realize those three events came together: the oil crash, and then the rationalization of Trinidad and Trinidad into Petrotrin, and then Texaco's exit. All of those things came right after.
All of that was happening.
Wow.
All that. So you could imagine it was quite turbulent. I mean, we enjoyed good times when things were running smoothly, but after a time we came to expect those things, and of course it had an effect on the technical staff and so on. The companies at some point had even offered a voluntary separation package, and some people took the opportunity to leave the organization.
So that was professionally. What about personally? Because to give you a little insight for myself, when things crashed in Houston in 2016, 17, 18, as only when I had left Houston, whereas a lot of people lost families, wives left, homes were broken up because resources are no longer there. You know, I can't afford this, can't afford that. You know, you have to downsize, and people don't want to do that. So what was it like for you and your friends personally during that time with all of this upheaval?
Yeah, I can't say that it had a kind of an effect like that on myself or of my peers. I can't say that. I mean, most of us in the late 80s, 90s, we had started to build our homes and so on, and build our lives around the world of work. But I don't think it ever entered into our minds that we were threatened as far as that living outside of the company was concerned. I can't recall any, other than the fact of job security, where people started to fear. It never really came to pass.
There were no cuts. There were no like 50%.
Well, there was the VSET. Right. But remember, we were in a unionized environment.
Right.
So that many of the decisions around things like that had to involve a discussion among all the groups, the management, the union, and so on, which represented the workers and so on, and the state.
Right.
And the state had a very important role as far as that was concerned, because the state, I think the importance, the state wants to make sure that its people are taken care of, and that so that job, even though we started to question those things, I think it's also balanced by the fact that we were a state company, and it's not like, I think, many of those private businesses and so on, they can easily make a decision.
They can turn on a dime.
Yeah. But even though we were starting to wonder, I think maybe we were more wondering about the ups and downs, ups and downs of the business, and how much of this we were going to be able to, we would go through, and so on.
Yeah. And I remember at the time, well, I was young, and I loved corn curls. So mommy would go into Woolworths, and I would be like, I want corn curls, and I'd be like, why? We can't afford it. What do you think? Do you think that period affected the country, and did you see that? Did you see effects like when you went to the grocery store? Did it affect this? How do you think it affected society? That period, or Trinidad was like, whatever, you know.
I can't recall.
There being a major economic shock over that time. And I think you may be right, because I think when the price of oil went negative, for us in Heritage, people were panicking, but the country was like, whatever. We continue doing what we're doing. Maybe that's to the strength of the infrastructure around the industry, and that, there was upstream and downstream, and when upstream is down, then downstream is more profitable.
One of the big things for the oil business is the oil subsidies, and the government had always had these subsidies around oil, the price of oil at the pump.
Right.
Gas at the pumps.
Right, gasoline. That's where people will see it.
Yeah, and that's where I think more than anything, as people see. But it never really changed until the modern times, these times. Yeah. But all through that period.
Yeah.
But of course, you didn't have as many cars.
Right.
You didn't have people alone in their car.
Yeah.
The traffic on the road.
I remember, because you have trains now. 5,000 people going to town, one person per car, all going in the same direction.
Using a lot of gas.
Yeah.
And the difference between the oil price and the government, the amount of subsidy that they provide for this particular part of the budget, the government takes care of it, and it would have more, I think, been. Because they could not avoid it now, that's why you're seeing the effects.
So you were in the state company, and I guess you're basically onshore and West Coast Soldado. That would have been your main theater of operation. How did the return of the bigger IOCs affect what you did and the industry, and how did because they focus mainly on gas, right?
These are big exploration projects, more because we had been doing a lot of development in Petrotrin.
Right.
I think there wasn't any, even in Trinidad, a lot of the activities were centered on development and enhanced oil recovery.
Right.
So that with the advent of the return of the international oil companies, I don't know if you call them oil companies or what.
Energy companies now.
IOCs anymore. These were big projects, so we're talking about exploration now. And so in 2004, the government directed that all of the government's equity in these big exploration projects will be vested in Petrotrin.
Oh, okay.
Right? So that means that the government usually had at least up to I think a 30 or 35% share, or about 20% share, and probably less in some cases, in these joint ventures. So that provided an opportunity now for a different experience, both for myself and for the others. Right. At that time, I was already working in joint ventures. I spent quite a number of years working in joint ventures.
Okay. So how did the JV department work?
Well, it's very small. It was just me and one other, and the manager at the time. And we had an assistant. But the way the JVs work is that you have these technical committees and the operating committees. And the role of the technical committee was to oversee the technical evaluation of the license. And the operating committee would oversee the operations of the project. And contract administration and things like that. Because you have very complex contracts.
So you kind of mirrored the ministry then? Kind of the ministry has a contract team?
No, it's totally, because the ministry now is not involved. But we, when I was working there now, we would have to attend these meetings. I would have probably been looking at the technical work, trying to understand the geology of the specific blocks. So the blocks in the North Coast, NCME, the East Coast, of the Shelf Slope Break, South Coast, Columbus Channel, and the Brighton anticline of I was involved. It gave me an opportunity then to become familiar with the geology of all of these areas.
So beautiful opportunity.
Yeah, as well as
to see all of these companies as the prospect is progressing. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, and large scale exploration projects, both onshore and offshore, has happened when we did the Southern Basin Consortium 1 and 2. So Southern Basin Consortium 1 was onshore, Southern Basin Consortium 2 was in the Gulf of Paria. So
I see.
So it was an opportunity there to become not just involved in that technical realm, but also the operating realm, and to start learning about contracts, contract administration, getting training in negotiations and things like that.
Wow.
And then, of course, these exploration projects use different data sets to the ones you were traditionally using in the development and enhanced oil recovery. So you're talking about large 3D seismic data sets, gravity, magnetics, mineral studies, sedimentological studies using the core, all the cores that Petrotrin have. And Petrotrin has one of the most extensive core records in the country. Big regional studies based on plate tectonics and the evolution of the Caribbean plate. So it's a totally different approach, different data sets, different skill sets. You're meeting people with different perspectives from around the world. You're attending meetings.
They're bringing all of the international experts to bear on a project.
Because these are going to be expensive. So they really put a lot of effort into all of the ways of discerning what the geology could be.
Risking,
And so you meet all these people. You're attending meetings locally, internationally, and so on. You're interacting with all sorts of people. So it's a tremendous experience. And then you're also learning about the basins. Your knowledge of the Trinidad and regional geology is deepening. For me, in terms of my experience. So, and you start to think about different ways of looking at the geology, what that could lead to you coming up with some creative idea that would lead you to the next new oil field.
So how do you think, using all of these data sets, is it better or worse? Did it change how you approach the industry? Because you're talking about seismic, magnetics, gravity, paleontology, cores. Some people would say, well, just make a decision, drill a hole. How coming from a development where you're chasing this rig, kind of fill this rig to that. Which one do you think is better?
I'm a firm believer in the power of integration. To me, there's nothing else. If it is that you want to be ultimately successful, firm believer in that. There are people who question that way of looking at it because, as you say, sometimes it's just about getting to this point by this time. And you can do the two. It just requires a lot more effort on. And today, now that you have computer platforms where you can house different data sets on a platform that makes that integration harder, but more, not easier, but you can do it if you really commit to it. I think that's the way to go. When I was one of the big framework projects that I was head of in Petrotrin was the Shallow Horizons project, which we came up with a sequence stratigraphic framework for the late Miocene to Pliocene stratigraphy of Trinidad.
Yeah.
That is where the integration was what allowed us to identify prospects, leads, possible prospects, and so on in the southern basin onshore that we would have never found or identified without the integration of the logs, the seismic, the outcrops, the core, high resolution biostratigraphy, and things like that. Okay. And I saw how it allowed us to identify opportunities that we would have never identified otherwise. Right. So I'm a firm believer in integration and not leaving out the data. Because when one of the training courses we went early in our careers, I remember the lecturer saying, if it is when you do your model, one of the geologic data sets is not fitting with the model, then it means that you have more work to do on your model.
Right.
And so I remember, and also the geophysicist telling me, if you hadn't given me those tops that you gave me, based on the high resolution biostratigraphy integrated with the well log data and cores, he said I would have had a totally different interpretation of the sighting data set. A lot of people today, they feel that the biostratigraphy is not as important as other data sets. But I don't feel that way.
So two things, one to deepen and one to pivot. So the biostratigraphy, why do you think that is? I'd read an article that one of the first, I think it was paleontology or biostrat labs in the world was at Point of Pay.
Yes.
Why do you think people now, what was the argument of that person? Why should I ignore this data set? Is it that, do you think they don't have the people to understand and do the analysis to bring it to life? Or do you think it's just like, oh, well, it's no longer relevant? What do you believe is the reason
well, remember, it is
not integrating?
It is a geologic data set. And how in heavens, and it is the only one that is based on real, actual data. Our log is a measurement that you interpret to have a certain meaning. A seismic line, same thing. But a sample is the only representation of the subsurface that you have, whether it's the lithology or the content of the sample, which is the bio, the fauna, and so on. And flora, if you're looking at palynology. So to me, it's the only true representation of the subsurface. So how, as a geologist, could you conceive of doing an interpretation that ignores the sample? You send samples, they get porosity, permeability, and so on. But you're talking about, you want to ignore the faunal interpretation, what is telling you about the paleo environment, what is telling you about the age, what is telling you about reworking, what is telling you about mud diaparism. All of these things are so critical to understanding. And if some person would say, oh, I look at the biostratigraphy, you're telling me that this is the forest, but I interpret it as the forest, so I'm going with that. But the thing is, another way to look at it is, yes, it might be saying that, but is there another way for you to look at that data and perceive what the meaning, when you start to merge the two, is there a different way you can interpret it? And that's essentially what it's about. It's not, well, it is that you have, and I think that's part of where you get the experience in that. Heritage is now the owner of a tremendous amount of biostratigraphic data, which is key to the future exploration and development of the basin. And you need to draw on resources that understand it and can discuss it in the geologic context so that you could then incorporate it into your evaluations. But I don't know how that is being treated. But it is very, very important to have people involved in the conversation that understand those concepts that drive the biostratigraphic interpretations, and then how that can feed into your own evaluation.
Yeah, I think for me, as being seismic is being a seismic data processor and interpreter. You know, people look at it as, oh, well, if it's on land, it doesn't matter. It's not good enough. And what I would say is that the key thing, and I'll call his name, Eric Williams, said to me, we were having a conversation like this, about 6 years ago. And he said, so what do you do? And I was struggling. And he said, no, you do one thing. You de-risk the prospect. You have to reduce the risk.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. Yeah.
So it's not adversarial. There's no right and wrong answer. It is, how are you reducing the risk of this person, of this particular reservoir, what level it's at, what it has in it, that type of thing. And we should look at it as, okay, if this new piece of information I have doesn't fit my model, I don't throw it away. I look at my model and I am able to go back into the process and figure out how it is. And I work with a couple of biostratigraphers, and I believe that the problem is may not be the data, it may be the communication of how that is put across. So yeah, we're kind of running out of time, and this is such an interesting conversation. So you were one of the first presidents of the GSTT who was female. What was that like? And what was it like being a manager and a leader as a woman at the time you were there? What are some of the big lessons that you learned? And what are some of the things you would want to transmit to young women coming through the industry now?
Well, you know, when I started in the industry, there weren't a whole lot of women around. And that has gradually changed. I think it's almost sometimes when I used to walk into the room when I was working at Petrotrin.
Yeah, lots of women.
I mean, it's almost like the room was full of women.
Yeah, and very competent. Very...
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, you know, the oil business, when I joined, was seen as a pretty rough and tumble place. Lots of very unique characters, unique language used in the oil fields and so on.
Language, yeah.
So many people view that as not the environment that a woman would gravitate towards. But I never had a problem with it, actually.
Okay.
I think sometimes some people had a problem with me being there because I think that was not the traditional place. That for many people, they had seen women in the office doing that kind of job on the rig, going offshore with a helicopter.
Imagine you on a rig telling a 6'4" man.
And you walk into
that sample.
and you walk into the mess and you are the only woman there, and it's all these men, and then you have to make special. In those days, you have to make special arrangements for me when we were filming
different room,
offshore,
different bathroom,
all of that. So I don't think that it is as extreme as that today, but that was the experience I had. Some people used to ask me, well, what are you doing here? You know, why don't you go and do X? Because so I couldn't make the decision on my own as to where I wanted to be.
Right.
You know, but I mean, those things never really bothered me. I just went with the flow. I became so accustomed to the business that I don't think there is any difference between the aspirations of men and women as it relates to working in environments such as this. There's no difference. That's what I've found. I think one of the things that as a manager, as a leader and so on, I think other women like to see that, because it's kind of confirms in them that, you know, these are the things that I can aspire to. So in that sense, it's very useful to be in that position. And as you started off this conversation, you talked about standing on the shoulders of others. You know, and that is what the oil business has always been about. The oil fields we're working today, it was the work of the earlier people who, regardless of what we think about that work today, it generated 3+ billion barrels of oil recovered onshore. Trinidad, since the discovery of the first oil fields in the early 20th century. So that It is a fantastic place to work. I got a lot of job satisfaction out of it, but it is all consuming, I have to say.
Yeah.
It can be all consuming. I think people have to stop and think about that sometimes, because sometimes
When
you
you
get
say
so
all consuming, what do you mean?
sometimes it almost like it becomes the main thing in your life. You know, you're home and you're thinking about it. Everything that you do is around the oil winning process. And I mean, in the old days, I remember we used to have these radios that we used to walk around with, so you have that in the house.
Right, yes, I remember my dad
So
had
the-
a radio that they would call and say,
And these people, you know, language and all. So, you know, it could be really.
and then it was the pager and then the cell phone. Yeah, yeah. You were never off.
You are never off.
Yeah.
And that is the thing about it. You're never off, especially when you get into management. Because if there are more difficult decisions to make, they would want your opinion to help to make that decision, or to make sure that you're okay with the decision.
I have a more controversial question. In observing the women in the industry, I think some women make the choice not to have a family because of how all-consuming it is. Do you think it's difficult to balance for men and women having a successful career in the oil and gas industry and have a family?
But many people have done it and done it quite well, successfully. So I don't see that as one of the main reasons for people making the choices that they do. Right. Regardless of where you work, where you live, what you do, and so on, people make choices that are right for them.
Right.
You know, so you may decide that this is what I want my life to be, but it may not be the way I want my life to be. Right. And there's nothing wrong with that, because at the end of the day, the person responsible for your decisions are you. I see so many people in the oil business have done both. They have had a career, they've raised a family. All of us have troubles.
Right.
You know, not everything goes smoothly, and it is no different any other industry for me. It's a unique industry that is international, that's global, and that's, to me, is what is different about it. Yeah. And and you make a good living in it, you know.
True. I was going to ask you at the beginning, when you saw all of this, did that attract you, the money associated with it?
Well, I never knew what the pay was. But what I knew is that from the way where I was born and how I grew up, that people there had one of the best ways of life in the country.
Comfortable.
Very comfortable. People didn't really worry about a lot. People weren't poor and things like that. You weren't wondering where the next meal would come from, and so on. So I always knew that is what it was about. Yeah. But I never knew that some of the best salaries are paid in the oil fields and so on.
It wasn't a consideration. Yeah, I can say it's been an entertaining conversation. I think one of the big things that I learned from this and from my time is that it's really about the relationships. I was talking to a friend of mine last night, and I mean, just to give a little background, how we met was, I was lineman, and I'd go to these Caribbean parties in Houston, and I got introduced to him. And we just hung out, and I had a number of crises in my life. 2 hurricanes, house was flooded. But he would always kind of be there. He'd be like, I'll help you do this, I'll help you do that. And I remember, I realized that when I talk about people, that for me, money is not that important. Because if you have good relationships with people, you can make money. You can get another job, because people are in control of. People are the connection between the money and yourself. If you have a good relationship with your manager, your supervisor, they'll promote you. The people, as you said, sometimes we were talking about it earlier, some of the best technical people do not make the best employees, because you have to learn to work within this team.
Yes, absolutely.
By learning how to be in better relationship with people,
yes,
things can improve. So I think one of the most valuable lessons that this industry teaches us and life teaches you in the end is it's all about the relationships you have with people and how you invest in them. I mean, you want to invest more than you withdraw.
Yes.
In general. So yeah, and I think that's what I learned from here. That is what management is about.
Yeah,
as you said,
people.
The company took care of the people, and the people took care of the company.
That's right.
And then everybody succeeded.
That's right.
So
and we achieved quite a bit with that.
Yeah.
And I would also say that in the earlier history of the Geological Society, we had the oil mainly the people from Trinidad and Trinidad. We had the people from the IMA, the Institute of Mineral Refineries. There are some geologists there, water resources, quarries, the surveyors, a whole group. A lot of people used to be involved, and they used to present things. So those relationships were not just in the oil company. The GSTT was a platform for us to meet geologists who were pursuing different paths to us in the oil business and to learn about their business as well.
I think that's something we have to work on as a society.
But you all are doing a great job, but that's one of the things I always miss.
Yeah.
That is the platform, and the GSTT was the platform for that.
Yeah. So that's my last question, really. How do you think, what are some of the things you think us as petroleum engineers and geologists through the GSTT and SPE could do to raise our profile and to help Trinidad be a better place? What are some of the things you would like to see?
Well, that is one.
Yeah.
Because, one of the, as a country develops, it needs different kinds of skill sets.
Right.
It needs people to feel that they can contribute to national development and so on. Yeah. And these, other than the oil business, I mean, we are not a country that has, to me, made significant efforts in diversification.
Other industries. Yeah.
But you talk about the Geological Society of Trinidad and Tobago, geologists can make a contribution in other areas of life that would also help to build the country. We used to talk, in the old days, we used to talk about the engineering geologists involved in construction. Some of our roads don't last very long. We have a problem with landslides and so on. We build, sometimes you need some help with how you design and build your bridges and big infrastructure projects.
Right.
To me, we learned in university that there's a role for geologists in that, but we don't see it in this country.
Right.
So that is just an example to say that somehow we need to have an effort that raises the profile of the profession of geology as a driver of national development beyond the oil field.
Right.
Even in the oil fields, I don't think a lot of people know, it's simple to know engineer, but sometimes people, when you say geologist, they already don't know what that means, but they know that you're doing something important.
Yeah.
Or geophysicists,
that's
you're doing something important. Yeah, but and there's so many tools today.
Yeah.
Social media, actual person-to-person intervention, you all had the school programs and so on. There are different ways of advocating, for want of a better word, for geology as a profession that is involved overall in national development. Hydrogeology is another one that comes to mind.
Yeah, so you have civil engineering, hydrogeology, geothermal.
Yeah, so you need to make sure that the people there are people in the country who are doing that, and they need to be at the table.
Right, give them a platform.
They need to be at the table at the GSTT.
Right. Understood. Good.
And the same thing goes for the engineers. It's not petroleum engineers. So they're very specific that it is petroleum. But in terms of the geology, I know the GSTT seems to focus, because most of the geologists are working in the oil business. What I think in terms of the future, we need to see how we can make a difference. And have these people around the table.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I met a geologist at Water Resources the other day. I went to something and I met a geologist, and they are totally out of the network.
Yeah,
And I don't know what they do and whether how they're progressing as geologists.
Well, I think there's a conference coming up that we've been asked to help with talking about water resources and clean water and that type of thing. So Therese has been very good at making that link and, but I think one of the things that I was told as well recently is I was part of the technical talks team. We need to have other talks that may not be technical or outside of,
Oil and gas.
outside of oil and gas. Ms. Telemaque, I'd really like to thank you for your time. It was an amazing conversation. My long list of questions, I didn't get through them.
We talk too much.
Yeah, no. I think it was just meant as a guide, but I think, as I said, you said something, it's important that we get the people who live the history to tell their story.
Very important.
Yeah, we want.
So I'm happy that you all are doing that.
Yeah, and it's really an ode to the people who built the geological foundation at Trinidad. You talked about all of the things that we don't realize that we have. Free education, free health.
That's right.
Subsidized electricity, subsidized gas. And it's all because of people like yourself that you guys took an industry that what you said was 10,000 barrels, 20,000. And at the end of your time at Tesoro, it was probably 50,000, 60,000 barrels a day.
Not Tesoro, but
Trinidad.
No. What from the time Trinidad Tesoro started to the time that it ended, in the mature fields on that small acreage, the production never declined.
Never declined.
Never significant. I think it might have been about 5.5 of a percentage.
Right.
Yeah.
So those are important things, and it's important that people understand those stories and they understand how it injects into their life. And more importantly, we want to encourage other people, other women to get involved in the industry, people to aspire to be leaders, the people also to look at geology as a path to something different, geotechnical, civil engineering, hydrology, those things. But thank you so much for your time.
It was more than a pleasure.
And we will, when we finish, you'll be the first person to see your video.
Okay.
So thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, man.
Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah. So that's it.
Yeah, let's drink some of this tea.
Yeah. And it's completely cold.
And it's ginger, so that's like a ginger ale.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching GSTT Energy Beginnings and Legends. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And keep in touch at the GSTT on Instagram and the Geological Society of Trinidad and Tobago on Facebook. Catch issues of the Hammer newsletter on our website at thegSTT.org and look out for more episodes of GSTT Energy Beginnings and Legends, celebrating our geological foundation and future. Coming soon.